Um, and then I'm going to go ahead and pass this to Desi Kirilova from the Qualitative Data Repository. Desi, would you mind please sharing your screen?
Yes, hi. I am turning on my audio first and sharing my screen.
Great, thank you.
All right.
Looks
Hi
good.
again, everybody. Now I'm all set up. Yes, so I represent the Qualitative Data Repository, and I'll give a brief overview of what the Qualitative Data Repository is, then I will give kind of not so much a detailed version of what our preservation workflow looks like, because it's, as those of you who think about those things maybe even more than me know, it's a combination of policies and practices and technologies. So I'll do some kind of highlights of the main pieces that I think may be of interest to this audience. And then I will also talk about kind of the inflection point that we're at as an organization with respect to our preservation practices. And I'll explain in a minute what I mean by that. So that's my plan for today. And as Anna said, I certainly very much look forward to comments and questions and ideas from maybe places that are more established, bigger, with different take on preservation, and kind of giving us ideas to think about as we are at this time to pause and reflect, as I decided to name my presentation without any consultation with the rest of our team. So just know that that part is my own kind of editorializing. But in brief, what is the Qualitative Data Repository? Hold on one second, because I'm having trouble advancing the slides here. Oh, there we go. Okay. So we are a US-based, but US-based digital archive that serves the social science and communities very broadly conceived, and in particular, the researchers who work with qualitative materials and who create qualitative and or multi-method projects with a strong qualitative component. We're a fairly niche repository by design. QDR was established a little over a decade ago with the very intentional mission to serve that community, which the co-founders felt didn't have a place to really even start learning about qualitative data sharing, let alone actually do it. But now that the QDR has been around for 10 years, the place is there, the technology is there, the know-how is there, the expertise is there, and many, many examples are there, which we think is great and is leading to more people being willing to do this, even though it was not a common practice in qualitative research. We're hosted by Syracuse University, but as I said, we serve an international community, really anybody from any place in the world that does qualitative social science, public health, any cognate kind of disciplines is welcome to communicate with us. Other team members are at various other institutions, and of course the team also changes over time. Currently, our main other component is at the University of Washington in Seattle. We have 200 projects published, which does not sound like a lot over the course of 10 years, but I have to tell you, we have three times as many data projects unpublished yet in various stages of curation. And sometimes people have just started collecting their data, because we really are trying to encourage early communication with the repository. And so sometimes people really hear that at the right time and take us up on it before they even start data collection. They initiate a project. So I think our future is bright in terms of kind of growth of data projects. We also, I want to remember exactly, as of maybe 4 years ago, instituted an institutional membership. So we now have about 35 institutional members, and that number is growing as well. We provide some kind of different pricing model for them, but otherwise the services that we provide are pretty much the same. And since our establishment in 2014, we've been continuously Core Trust Seal certified. It was actually called something else in the very beginning, but we've aimed for that certification and achieved it every time on the 3-year cycle that it exists on. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning that is because A, we're very proud of that fact, but B, we use that certification or self-assessment and certification process that CTS is based on to actually in the very early stages to develop some of our policies and now to refine them, improve them, expand on some of them and so on. So I think that's kind of an approach that we took that has been beneficial to us. Very briefly, again, just for those of you who may have never thought about qualitative social science, what do the data that we hold look like? Well, this is our bread and butter. It's a very kind of boring looking, but super interesting in terms of content. Text files typically that represent interview or focus group transcripts. That's the vast majority of materials that come to us. But as you can also maybe imagine, qualitative social science involves a lot of other types of data as well. So we have videos. This is from a project that studied presidential campaigns across several Latin American countries, and the person got in touch with the production companies and with their permission has collected, several dozen video files and decided to archive those. Then many archival documents, some of them because they were, from older times, paper-based. And so the researchers who studied them took digital pictures that then they deposited with QDR. Various materials that come from administrative data and other more like gray materials, but then once they're collected with a very intentional social scientific frame in mind and question in mind, they become data for the project of various people. So that sort of materials like this document here from an institutional report of some kind. And then in addition to individual data deposits, which is the vast majority that we also have several special collections. Those, as you can see in these two examples, are usually much larger. So the Northern Ireland Research Initiative collection comprises of almost 2,000 individual files. And then the Trachtenberg papers, which are the legacy collection of this very well-known political historian, Mark Trachtenberg. It actually doesn't show here, but also are in the several thousand count. So they kind of present their own challenges, both for curation, but eventually for preservation purposes as well. And then we have one special collection that is being used as a model that I think we're also expanding going forward, which is a special collection of a journal that wants to have its, the qualitative data from articles published in it by its authors, published, in this branded way with QDR as well. Very, again, briefly, just by way of finishing the introduction to QDR, or in 3 images, what do our published holdings look like? And as I said, there's a whole, slew of stuff like that in the background that is not accounted in these images. But the big subject areas from which projects come, social sciences, as you see, is really predominant. And more recently, without any really intentional outreach from us, but because of various funder policies here in the US and elsewhere, people from medicine, health, and life sciences have been, researchers from those disciplines have been coming to us and finding us an appropriate venue when they have qualitative or multi-method data. Then law, computer and information science, earth and environmental sciences, those are the next big categories, and then others. The data project growth you can see over time. And then this last picture I included here because the file size by type, just to illustrate the huge variety of file types that we have to work with. The size is not so important for the conversation here, although you can imagine the videos are the first purple bar, and then after that it's other ones. But just the huge diversity of file types that people bring to us, and that presents its own, obviously, preservation challenges that we are very much aware of and try to stay on top of. Right, again, my advancing is having challenges here. Okay. Of course, QDR, as other digital archives, tries to be provider of fair data, so findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable data. And the way we do that is by an emphasis on curation. So we achieve fair in our context by practicing preservation-minded curation. Really, curation is very intensive. It's very interactive with the depositors, which is very different from some other repositories that exist out there. But we just felt that for the kind of data that we want to provide access to and preserve, and for the kind of scholarly community that QDR serves, this is of utmost importance. So our focus is very much on curation. For the purpose of this presentation here, I don't talk much about curation. But I'm happy to answer any questions. I forgot to fully introduce myself. I'm the senior curation specialist that leads the curation team. So any questions that you have about that aspect and how it interacts with the goal of long-term preservation, I'm happy to answer maybe in the Q&A. Here, I will do kind of, as I said, kind of highlights of our digital preservation policy, maybe with a little bit more focus on the technical piece. So as our mission states, QDR curates, archives, durably preserves, and provides access to digital data using qualitative multi-method social inquiry. Our digital preservation policy encompasses the technological and institutional steps that we take to ensure this goal of long-term preservation of all the data we hold. Two kind of starting principles are that we use file format migration where possible or necessary. Actually, what we really most try to do is advise people on the recommended file formats so that they can collect their data already in those file formats, give them to us in it, and then we don't need to migrate. But that doesn't always happen. People don't come to us so early in all cases. So then we do migration. And then for files where, again, that huge diversity of data files that we work with, that's not always possible. And there are not always clear format standards that we can turn to for some file types. And in those cases, we commit to bit level preservation at the very least, where kind of a recommended file format does not exist. Our digital preservation policy as a whole, when we first came up with it, more than 10 years ago now, was rooted in this document called Trusted Digital Repositories. As you can see, it's a very old citation at this point. But the principles that it laid out have served us very well. The key components are the very well known in these circles, OAIS compliance, Open Archival Information System compliance, with its very well known little model picture there. Then the clear administrative responsibility of the repository. What do we ask of the providers of the data? What do we commit to do with the data? And then various kind of legal documents that transfer their permission to us to do the things that we need to do for long-term preservation. Organizational viability of our organization is achieved by, as I said, being hosted by SU as an institutional kind of backer, but then also we have a research advisory board and a technical advisory board that have members not at SU who help us develop our policies, kind of help us make sure that we comply with our own policies, and then that we look forward for kind of longer term and bigger picture sustainability down the line. Related to that, obviously, the financial sustainability and our diversifying our support model, as I described, with institutional membership. The technological and procedural suitability, as I said, that's more what I'm focusing on today. System security and procedural accountability. The last piece we accomplished by a very stringent focus on documentation. Everything that we do, we try to document so that it's done consistently across the team, regardless of who the specific members are that are doing different steps, but also so that there is kind of a track record of what happened, what was done, and how it was done, and so on. So our OAIS implementation in brief, with a focus on the process. What happens with the data files when we receive them is they are checked for completeness and integrity. The complete initial, and that's where, that's done with human power, and with a lot of back and forth with depositors if we discover that things are incomplete, which especially on the documentation front, often they are. Integrity is checked more in a more automated manner. Then the complete initial deposit or the submission information package is preserved locally as it is in its full, initial version, unchanged prior to curation steps. Then I talked briefly about how we try to recommend the appropriate preservation file formats to people if they can submit their data to us in that form. We typically consult sources like the Library of Congress Sustainability of File Formats or the UK National Archives Pronom. Then on ingest, Dataverse, which is our repository software system, creates checksums automatically for every ingested file. Those are stored to allow integrity checks by users and third parties, of which we have some automated versions, as you hear in a second. On publication of the Dataverse system ingest of the archival package is packaged with some metadata that is in compliance with RDA recommended forms. And then similarly, again, continuing how we implement this open archival information system model with a focus on the storage and backup. So our primary data storage happens on AWS Simple Server Solutions on the East Coast. This service also provides a full backup daily, which could be useful for quick recoveries if needed. This is one of the automated integrity checks that happen during data transfer. Then redundant copies are distributed, and then further redundancy checks are done while the files are at rest as well. Then we have secondary backup that is provided by our local, by our host institution, by SU-based, basically Maxwell School's IT department or computing services. They provide secure storage for sensitive data if needed during curation, because we do deal with some sensitive data. They also provide regular secondary offsite backups, and they provide some other services like automated penetration testing that they subscribe to. Then for tertiary storage, and really for the goal of geographic diversification of our storage, we have a preservation copy of published data only. All the other stuff that is not published yet, and as I highlighted for you, that's a lot for us, is stored with the primary and secondary storage. For the tertiary storage, we only store preservation copies of the published data, everything that's been fully processed, curated, and published. That is done by using Google Cloud Cold Storage, an instance on the West Coast, I believe in Oregon. Then one other little kind of technical piece that I thought may be interesting, prior to our current core trustee certification, so that would mean prior to 2022, QDR's tech team conducted a successful internal testing to allow round-trip restoration of data sets between our 3 different Dataverse instances. And then currently on this front, one thing that the tech team is doing is exploring proof of concept transfer to other RDA conforming repositories, hopefully as purely as a theoretical exercise, but it is good, and we feel that it provides another kind of layer of robustness for our long-term preservation efforts if and when they make that a possibility. Then on the point of continuity of access, we are looking, kind of to make everything that we do, which serves us pretty well. And as I said, it has allowed us not only to successfully operate as a repository, but also continue to get this certification in our field. So we are not looking to change anything dramatically, but we are looking to add layers of robustness and also kind of to prolong our thinking, kind of make everything that we do now available in the long term. And so initially our long-term continuity of access plan revolved around membership of the Digital Preservation Network. With its collapse, as some of you may know, it's no longer around. We sought membership in a similar organization called the Data Preservation Alliance for the Social Sciences. As the name suggests, it's even more specifically tailored to the kinds of, to the community that we serve and the kinds of data that QDR allows access to. So DataPass, which is the short name for this organization, has a succession agreement among its members and clear transfer protocols as well. It also, which is of interest to us, engages in broader topics. It's not just the technical solution, but also interinstitutional coordination on metadata and preservation related issues. And it issues public statements on policy related questions in the data world. As I said, because we're now entering our second decade, we are doing any number of kind of internal reflections, including on preservation planning for the long term. I did want to make a little kind of sidebar here about what exactly is the long term. I'm sure you may have these conversations in your own institutions. Obviously, it's a very loose and vague phrase, and this is how it's defined actually in the same source that the OAIS concept and model comes from, which I thought is a little funny the way it's defined. A period of time long enough for there to be concern about the impacts of changing technologies, and so on and so forth. So I think with the pace of changing technologies, the long term has really gotten very short, but that doesn't mean that we're not trying to also, plan for and look forward to decades from now. So one thing that we're doing in our forward-looking efforts is actually, it's been of great interest to discover the Data Preservation Coalition's rapid assessment model and forward plan template. We're trying to fill this out, and so maybe in a future presentation by GPS, I can show you the results of that. So I will end here. I'm sorry if I missed timing notifications.
No, I think this is perfect. Thank you. Could everyone please show their appreciation with a round of virtual applause in Zoom? Also, I have a question in the chat, and then someone has raised their hand, but why don't, let's see, let's do this question first. How do you deal with rights/permissions on the materials copied by researchers from other archival or library institutions?
Yeah, great question. And that is definitely something that we work on a lot. So first of all, we would not accept something copied without, if it's copied just for individual use without explicit permission for further dissemination, we would not accept it. That would not be, according to most other archives, that would not be acceptable. There are very few that we've discovered that have a blanket kind of permission. So we really would research in the specific case, what are the rules under which the researcher may have obtained these, and if they do not, either if there's no blanket permission for further dissemination, which as I said is very rare, although it exists, or if the researcher did not obtain explicit permission for the dissemination of the things that they made copies of, we cannot accept it. But typically it's been more successful in researchers going back to the archive, and even if they did not obtain a permission at first, we help them work, craft a little template language that says, here are the purposes for which I want to deposit this with QDR. Here's the limited nature of what I'm depositing, and so on and so forth. And often they've been able to get this permission after the fact. So that's our approach.
Perfect, thank you. Mary Chris, would you like to go ahead and ask your question?
Oh, I'm sorry. I must have done that by accident because I thought it was the applause. Sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay. That's okay. Do we have any other questions in the chat? Let's see.
I just saw the comments, and I just want to say I only discovered this definition very recently, and it just made me laugh because it, you can't define any in any kind of timeline with the type of thing that they said. It just basically, whenever concerns can arise, consider that your long term.
Absolutely. Absolutely.